And we'll get started. Welcome everybody to today's HLAA webinar, Benefits of Employee Business Resource Groups, or EBRGs, Fostering a Diverse and Inclusive Workplace for All to Thrive. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amanda Watson, and I'm the meeting planner for HLAA and your host today. Today's presentation is being recorded for playback at a later date. You can find the link to that on the HLAA website. First, I'll start off with some tech tips. To see captions on this webinar, you'll need to click on the CC icon and click on Show Subtitle. You can also change the font size and subtitle settings. Chat is available for technical issues and panelists only. We would like participants to please use the Q&A icon to ask questions. Will you be using this to facilitate questions and answers after the presentation? If you joined by computer, the presentation should be in side-by-side mode. Slides are on the left and panelists are on the right in gallery view. You can also change the font size of your side-by-side view, or change, the size of your side-by-side view by hovering between the two screens and moving the gray bar to adjust to your desired slide. First, I'm gonna introduce Theo Shumsky. Theo is a digital accessibility engineer and a member of our HLAA's employment task force. Theo, first I'll turn it over to you.
All right, am I audible? Just to make sure. All right, thank you, Amanda. So hello to all. My name is Theo Shumsky. I'm a member of the HLAA employment task force and someone who lives with hearing loss. I use both hearing software and hearing aids to help me hear for work and life. And in my day job, I work in digital accessibility at PNC to really help empower our workforce for those who live with disabilities. And with HLAA, I come here for the same reason many of you do, to find answers and solutions to live a better life with hearing loss. Now we really appreciate everyone is sharing some of your valuable time with us today. And we have two very special guests to help us learn more about employee business resource groups. But before we kick it off, I'd like to give you a little background on the HLAA Employment Task Force, why we're doing this, who we are, and what our vision is. Now, the Employment Task Force is based around a purpose because of a problem. We know that Americans with hearing loss more actively search for work, but are less likely to be employed. So our goal is to increase employment opportunities for Americans with hearing loss in the labor force by bringing professionals in who are on the HR side, work in various organizations and industries such as government and financial, like we have today, to tell us a little more about how people with hearing loss can better access and perpetuate employment and how we can continue to create a hearing-friendly culture in the workplace. So as you see here, if you've been following our workplace task force series webinars, of course, and if you haven't, rest assured they're all recorded, and we encourage you to watch and share them. You'll find that our vision that you see on our screen is to move the needle forward through iterations. By bringing hearing loss awareness and education to the masses in hopes of creating a positive change for those who live with hearing loss, to have higher employment rates, be able to more actively search for work, be more likely to remain and thrive in the workforce, be part of today's competitive wages, and ultimately close the employment gaps that exist for those with hearing loss. Now it's a time for our special guest presenters. Now we have Carrie Stith of PNC Financial Services Organization and Gary Morin of the National Institute of Health's National Cancer Institute. Starting with Carrie, I'll give you a little bit of background. Carrie Stith is the Accessibility Director for PNC Financial Services. In his role, Carrie helps to shape and drive strategies to make PNC accessible for all employees and customers. And as the father of two sons with disabilities, Carrie has a long history of working with disability awareness and advocacy He's active in PNC Enable, which is PNC's Disability Awareness Employee Business Resource Group, or EBRG as we'll call it throughout this webinar. And until recently, Carrie served as PNC's Enable EBRG Awareness Group leader and personally led the Hidden Disabilities Awareness Group of Enable. Followed by Carrie, we'll have Gary Morin, who I'll introduce as well. So Carrie, take it away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Theo. And thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to be here and to share some information with you. So speaking of sharing, I am going to go ahead and share my screen now. So Theo, if you could just confirm that you can see it, that'd be great.
We can see it. Thank you.
Okay. So what you're going to hear from Gary and I are the benefits of employee / business resource groups, and they go by a variety of names. So so generically call them employee / business resource groups. As Theo has already noted at PNC, I guess we couldn't figure out which one we wanted, so we actually incorporate both names. But they go by a variety of names in various companies. And so what you'll hear from Gary and I are really two models of resource groups, and in terms of how resource groups are structured, I mean, the possibilities are really limitless. So if nothing else, maybe just consider what we're sharing with you, two possibilities, but you've got to determine really what works best for you and within your organization. So just a little background on what are employee business resource groups. So they're company sponsored. Sometimes you may have groups that meet informally within an organization, but these are groups that are sponsored by a company or an organization. They're formally recognized by an organization, and it's important to have, which we'll touch on a little bit later, it's important to have endorsement by leadership of an organization, because that brings with it other benefits. They are voluntarily, although I have heard of some organizations that actually pay leaders of their groups. I don't think that's prevalent, but some do. And these are employee-led. So think of them as a bit of a grassroots effort. I mean, there's a structure to them, but they really sort of come from the bottom up and not push top down. But the benefits of the group really are to foster an inclusive and diverse workplace. Groups are led and compromised of employees that may share characteristics and or interests, certainly interests, not always characteristics, but the interest has got to be there. And now, traditionally, we've seen groups that have been organized around characteristics such as gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, but that's changing. So we're really seeing groups where the focus has been expanded around disability awareness, which I'll make sure that I touch on pretty heavily here today, recognizing our audience and likely interests that you all may have. Stages of career, religion, stage of life, military service, and understanding generational differences. And what I've just laid out are the various groups that PNC has. But again, they can be around a lot of different things. And then with what we're seeing in a corporate landscape around things like environmental, social, and governance, you're starting to see groups formed around sustainability, wellness, et cetera. So, I mean, if you go do an online search on employee resource groups, you'll see that they are really structured around a lot of different things. And again, I already noted that groups can be go by a variety of names. So then what you call them is less important, but just to know that there's not sort of a uniform name for all of these groups. And then what are the benefits of the groups? That's what we're here to talk about today. What are the benefits? So One, promote employee engagement. If any of you are familiar with work by the Gallup organization, employees who are engaged in their work are more happy and more productive employees, less likely to leave, lower rates of turnover. So there's a lot of benefit for host companies and organizations to sponsor employee resource groups, because it's a boon to employee engagement, and it's something that largely is non-monetary, that companies can do that. It really creates a sense of belonging. You hear a lot, if you're active online at all, you hear talk about somebody kind of finding their tribe. And so it creates, everybody wants this, people want a sense of connection and belonging, and that's one of the big benefits of resource groups. Promote an inclusive environment. So Theo touched on earlier in terms of folks with hearing loss and what that looks like in the market in employment in terms of being underrepresented. And so when you've got resource groups, they help to ensure that those underrepresented groups have a voice. Build community with remote employees. Again, in this post-pandemic hybrid world in which we live in, a lot of people, while there's a big push, you've seen a lot in news lately with companies encouraging people to go back to work, back in the office. There's still a number of employees that work remote or work in a hybrid, have a hybrid work arrangement. So these groups really provide a sense of community for remote employees. Promote allyship. And so I may not, as a member of a group, I may not share a characteristic that might be a defining characteristic for a group. So again, I'll use the disability awareness as an example. I may not personally be a person, I may not be a person with a disability. I may not have a loved one with a disability. But if I want to further my understanding of a person with disabilities, then joining a resource group is a great way to do that. Provide leadership opportunities and support professional development. Much of career development and employee development is experiential. We're doing sort of formal learning here, but research has shown that the most beneficial way for somebody to develop is to actually be hands-on doing the work. And resource groups really afford those leadership opportunities in the work setting in a volunteer way. And if you can lead in a volunteer organization, then that's a real hallmark of leadership, because you don't have organizational authority over folks. You've got to look for other ways to lead and to motivate people. I've already talked about retention, but I hadn't touched on recruitment. Often, if word gets out that a particular organization is known, looks very favorably to certain populations, then it really is a boon to recruitment. And PNC has that reputation among certain communities as a great place to work. And so it really helps with the recruitment process. Supports business innovation. One of the things that we have done at PNC is that we've actually had, we call a flash hack. Some of you might know them as by other names, where you're actually bringing people together to solve a business problem and develop something within a 24-hour period. But groups can actually support business innovation. Positively influence company practices and policies. I can tell you that our disability awareness resource groups have had a positive impact on our policies and practices in terms of creating materials around much of our disability awareness content has been heavily influenced by our resource groups. Things like creating accessible meetings. We've engaged members to actually listen to them and provide their content. And then, in our case, unlike Gary's, right, we're for profit, and so we've got customers. And so resource groups really are sort of internal consultants, or they can really serve as internal focus groups to help to drive help to drive better understanding of diverse markets and opportunities. At PNC, we've got 12 resource groups, and you can see what these groups are here. And the groups, I've highlighted the groups where the name may not necessarily be evident of what it is that group does. So again, I mean, as I mentioned, they can be structured around different things. I think you see some here that you might not necessarily think of initially, right? Some are novel, like first gen, for somebody who's a first generation college student, that's a unique experience that others may not share. But others are, I think, pretty straightforward from the name. You can see what they are. I've highlighted here in yellow PNC Enable because I'll spend more time talking about them than any of the other groups here. So what this slide represents, it's a map of the U.S. With certain cities and states highlighted. So PNC, I think it's probably about 60,000 employees strong. And so we have 15,000 employees that are members of resource groups. Now, those 15,000 employees, those aren't discrete numbers per se. So for example, looking at myself, I'm a member of several groups. So I would essentially sort of be counted multiple times. So these aren't sort of individual discrete numbers, but we do have a large percentage of our employees that participate in resource groups. And so we have 100 chapters of the groups that I just shared on the previous pages. And those chapters are reflected in over 30 markets. Last year, we completed the acquisition of BBVA. And I'm almost certain that will in itself actually drive the creation of additional chapters now that our footprint is bigger. One of the things I want to mention as well is that there are, again, various models, and we have some of our groups, including Enable, which is our disability awareness EBRG, which is virtual. So we don't have a sort of physical presence per se. We're virtual across our footprint, and we'll talk about some of the benefits of that a bit later as I kind of move on here. And so, here's some statistics about PNC Enable. So group was started back in 2010. Right now, we have over 1,900 members. As I talked earlier, the group is virtual. And so one of the distinctives of PNC Enable, so if you think of Enable as the umbrella organization, underneath Enable, there are various awareness groups that are focused on specific disabilities or life conditions. And you can read what these are here. And one of the nice things about our awareness groups is that there's a lot of intersectionality among the groups. So for example, somebody can be a caregiver of a child with a disability, and that person could be the parent of a child with autism or any of the other disabilities that are noted here. So there's not a mutual exclusivity with these groups, and there are also opportunities for the groups to work together for the common good. In some cases, the challenges that each of the groups face, while being unique to a certain extent, there's also a lot of crossover and commonality that groups can partner on. So in terms of what the benefits are for of Enable specifically, and you'll have to excuse me because the top part of my screen I'm sharing on is a little obscured, so I'm not quite seeing the heading. But again, I've talked a bit before about fostering a sense of community and connection. And one of the things that was really beneficial during the pandemic was the fact that this group is virtual. And this group did not have to transition to becoming virtual. It was set up from the beginning as virtual. So think about in various workplaces as people learn to work in a virtual work environment, and how to connect and how to conduct meetings. Those were things that we had figured out prior to the pandemic. So while the pandemic, created challenges for us, like it did for everybody else, in terms of how we needed to conduct ourselves, those weren't challenges. Supports employees' career development and advancement. In this case, both Theo and I can offer testimony to how Enable supported both of us in our, frankly, the jobs that we each have now. The fact that we're both working full time, focused on accessibility, is a direct result of the work that both of us have done within PNC Enable. Provides input into accommodation needs. Again, understanding what the accommodation, how the accommodation process can be enhanced. Are there additional things that can be added to our accommodations catalog, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I've already talked about providing input on awareness and etiquette. And then with the notion of members of these groups serving as internal focus groups really help us to be a proxy for our customers to see through their eyes what it's like to be a person with disability and do business with us. Provide input into our technology accessibility offerings. Theo, who's on the call, we won't get into the specific technologies or endorse particular offering, but as a member of Enable in his own lived experiences, was able to recommend a technology that is now available to others as an offering from PNC. And again, I've already touched on the benefit of allyship already. So this is recognizing that I'm talking to an employment group. So if you're looking for a job, one of the things perhaps maybe you hadn't considered previously, but think about in terms of as you're looking for a job, as you're interviewing, why not ask if that prospective employer has a resource group? I've listed what the benefits of the groups are. One of the benefits I didn't touch on, it's a way for you as a new employee to really get connected to what the company culture is like. Certainly, as an organization is seeking to recruit you, they are going to give you one perspective of what that culture is like. But talking to employees who are outside of the formal talent organization, you may provide a bit of a different perspective. Somebody defined culture as the way we do things around here, and talking to colleagues can give you a sense of how we do things around here. In one of the biggest challenges fitting any organization is understanding what that culture is, and we've already touched on a bit, some of the additional challenges that a person with disabilities might have in terms of integrating into an organization. So I would recommend, again, if you onboard to a new organization, and if that organization has a resource group, look to connect with that group within, the first 90 days of your employment, and not only just say, hey, sign me up as a member. But become active. It's a great way for you to network within a new organization, with those who've been there for a while. So then, hey, suppose you find yourself in a situation where you're currently with a company that doesn't have a resource group. So how do you start one? So one of the examples is, here are just some of the things here that you'd be able to do. You want to make sure that there's interest from your colleagues, share your ideas with HR. One of the things that's critically important is you've got to be able to demonstrate how a resource group is going to support the needs of any organization. How, by the establishment of this resource group, is it going to further the cause of the organization? What's the mutual benefit there? It's critically important to gain top line management support and find an executive sponsor. They can do things like make sure that you have a budget, which is critically important. Not that you need a tremendous amount of money to start these groups, but you do need some funds to start. You want to recruit members. And one of the things that's critically important as well is maintain organizational support. You know, I said early, these groups are volunteer. And so you will have people leave the organization. You will have people change roles that might have less time to commit to and commit to the EBRG. Another thing, again, particularly within a disability awareness space, if you have members who are persons with disabilities, they may have a change in their health condition that causes them to step down or to have to take short-term or long-term leave. So maintaining organizational support is critically important. So with that, that concludes all of my comments. And I don't know if we're going to take questions now or if we're going to wait. I guess we'll wait till the end, I guess is what is my understanding.
Yep. So this is Theo. I'm queuing everyone's questions, so keep them coming. They're all looking really great here, so I appreciate it. And we'll address the questions in the last 15 minutes of our webinar. So thank you, Carrie, for the wonderful presentation and all the useful information as well. So now we'll hop over and introduce Gary Morin. If you'd like to turn on your camera there. And to get started here, Gary Morin is the Section 508 coordinator of the National Cancer Institute. Prior to specializing in info and communication technology accessibility, Gary was an ASL interpreter. He's been with the National Institute of Health since 1993. He's a hearing aid and captioning user and a strong advocate for accessible technology as a means to address unemployment and underemployment, as well as healthcare disparities experienced by deaf and disabled people. So his role at the National Institute of Health allows him to promote meaningful access to both live and pre-recorded videos through both quality captioning and audio descriptions. It's an honor to introduce Gary Morin. Take it away.
Great. Good morning. Sound coming through okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Excellent. Great. As Theo said, I'm Gary Morin with the National Institutes of Health and within the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute. I joined NIH as a sign language interpreter with a 5-year plan, and that was back in 1993. It's a great agency, great federal agency with an incredible mission. We have 27 institutes: National Cancer Institute, National Eye Institute, National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, institutes that specialize in allergies and diabetes, kidney diseases. So there's a place for everybody, anyone who's interested in a scientific environment to work at. It is a federal agency with all that comes with the complications and the bureaucracy. But I think if you find a job or a position that is of interest, the NIH is a great place to work. Similar to PNC, we've got a lot of locations, a lot of organizations. And I think in that regard, getting involved in employee resource groups really helps. I loved the expression that Carrie used, find your tribe. You know, you may have a lot of professional colleagues, but sometimes it's nice to find colleagues that have more of a personal affinity or that you have an affinity with. Please feel free to reach out to me afterwards. And I know that HLAA will be posting our slides along with the video afterwards. And I always like to put lots of links into my PowerPoint presentations. You know, you may be in an environment that is incredibly diverse, and that's great. And sometimes you also like to be with your own kind, whatever that kind or that community or tribe is, whether it's based on religious affiliation or persons of color, disability status, or promoting and supporting employees with disabilities. And I'll talk at some point this morning about the distinction and working together between people who are deaf and hard of hearing and employees or persons who are disabled. Because sometimes there's a unifying factor and sometimes the needs are quite different. And I think we've had that experience at the NIH that I'll be able to share this morning. The NIH officially has outreach programs within its Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which typically or historically has been known as Equal Employment Opportunity. We have an Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander employment program, Black employment program, Hispanic, Native American, people with disabilities, and sexual and gender minority programs. And women. These are all federally conducted activities and programs by the agency. They each have a program manager that they're now called portfolio managers, but historically they had titles such as the Disability Employment Program Manager. These are full-time positions. There's one for the entire National Institutes of Health. And just to give a sense of how big that is, as I said, we have 27 institutes. There's about 30 or 40,000 employees and staff members and visiting scientists and guest fellows and researchers. So it's pretty huge. And we have locations across the country, largely around Bethesda and Rockville, Maryland, but we're also in Baltimore with the National Institute on Aging and the National Institute on Drug Abuse. The Diabetes Institute has locations out in New Mexico. We have research facilities out in Montana, the National Institute on Allergies and Infectious Diseases. And then in North Carolina, we have the National Institute on Environmental Health Sciences. So our physical locations are really incredibly disparate. And so you may be in a location where there's not a lot of other people who are deaf or hard of hearing or disabled or other gay and lesbian employees. And it's nice sometimes to find that affinity. And so working across institute or across physical location through employee resource groups is a real opportunity. So we have these official programs, and they're led by a team of diversity specialists, principal strategists, and they each have advisory groups. And these are official bodies of about a dozen people each who are officially selected and are members for 2 years of the Employee Engagement Committee, or those as official advisors to these portfolios. That's different from our employee resource groups. There we go. And I really can't stress enough that refer back to Kerry's slides. I can really just add on. Kerry has said so much of what is relevant at the NIH and other federal agencies. I can just really now give a federal taste or flavor to it. We have employee resource groups that are voluntary. They're employee-led. For us, they're unfunded. Many of our groups do have budgets or secretaries, but there's really no budget. I'm sorry, not secretaries. Financial secretaries? Not sure what the title would be. Sometimes we do self-fundraising for activities, but nothing from the agency itself. We are unfunded from the official agency. They're led by employees. We do have to get permission from the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion because we are using government resources. We're allowed certainly to use email, listservs, webinar platforms such as Zoom, WebEx, and Teams, Microsoft Teams. We're allowed to, and expected, in fact, I just checked the policy this morning, we're expected to offer and provide reasonable accommodations. So they are officially endorsed and sanctioned groups, but they are run by the employees for the employees. So historically, they are similar to, as Kerry mentioned, gender, ethnicity, religious affiliation. But more and more, there are employee resource groups, and there are clubs as well that are, there's the photo club and the running club and the mountain climbing club. Lots of ways for employees to get involved and to meet people within the agency, but not within a professional setting. Some of them meet after hours, some meet during lunch. When work was fully not virtual, but fully in person, we met on a regular in-person basis, whether it was for lunch once a month in the cafeteria. And as the NIH has grown, that's become more and more difficult. And that has led to life cycle changes in some of the groups. For instance, our deaf employees group, the DEAF, Deaf Employees Advisory Forum, which was started in about 1990, was very active for many, many years, met in person, had meetings to discuss various issues around better communication access, the need for more interpreters, the need for CART or captioning services for meetings, advocating for more and better captioning of pre-recorded videos. As many of those activities or those issues got resolved, the level of activity diminished. It went through a life cycle where it was driven by a business need. We need to advocate for better accessibility, better communication. Once that was achieved, there wasn't necessarily a glue that held the group together anymore. And I think that's okay, that groups do come and go. And I'll list some of the disability and deaf-related groups that we've had over time. They support one another, whether the groups are active or not. Kind of one group takes up the mantle when another group is in a rest period of time, I think. Just need to move the captions out of the way so I can see the rest of my slides, rest of the content. They do help certainly both, I think, in personal and career development. It's a great way to network with people and find out what's going on in another organization within the agency. Whether you're meeting socially, you're going to end up talking about work. So whether you're a cancer researcher in the Cancer Institute or you're studying cancer within the Dental Institute, or in allergies and infectious diseases and the impact of cancer on that, you're going to be finding out what other opportunities are available. You might find out that another organization is more deaf-friendly, more supportive of women in science. And so, even though we're one agency, the NIH, National Institutes of Health, we are 27 institutes, and each one does have its own culture. So you may find that one part of the NIH is more, has funded better, has self-funded for reasonable accommodations, let's say, or is better about providing interpreters or providing CART service, captioning service for real-time meetings. So you may, end up moving over to another institute or looking for a detail opportunity. And that's something you can find out about really just from one-on-one chatting with other members of your disability interest group or your religious affiliation interest group. Even though you're coming together based on a personal affinity, you are sharing professional information with one another. Just some references, employee resource groups are growing incredibly across the country. Apparently, they've been in practice for about 40 years. Over 90% of Fortune 500 companies have them. That's saying something, that there's the support in the corporate world for employees to have a better morale, a better workplace environment. And that's not just about going in and being in a factory-like environment, going in, doing your work and leaving, but it's about being happy on the job. The company wants to invest in you if they want to keep you. So it does drive better business. Some companies, some agencies use the voluntary employee resource groups as their means of doing outreach and recruitment. In the federal government, that's not our job. That's the purpose of those specialized portfolios. It's the Disability Employment Program Manager's job and their advisory committee, their engagement committee, to do more and better recruitment and to work with deaf and disabled employees for employee development, to recruit, hire, maintain, train, promote employees with disabilities. It's the employee resource groups that are there to kind of keep each other happy and to keep each other active and help keep the morale up, but not to do the work of the federal government. That's what they have paid staff for. We're there to support one another. EARN is an employee resource group dedicated to disability issues and persons with disabilities. It's part of the Department of Labor. And they've got some guidance. And I did a Google search the other day. I think Carrie mentioned it too. If you do a search online for employee resource groups, you'll find an incredible amount of resources, whether it's links to specific groups that you might want to connect with and reach out to find out, how did you start your group? What are the pros and cons of your group? What's made it successful? What have been the challenges? And then there's some direct guidance. So these links here will give you one model. Again, there are many models, but here's one model of how to develop your group, how to recruit members, how to develop a mission statement. What is the focus of your group? So it looks out of order alphabetically, but it's alphabetical to match that listing of the special emphasis portfolios. At the NIH, we have at least the Federal Asian Pacific American Council, the Blacks in Government, which is a big national organization that then has subchapters at many, many federal agencies. Similarly, there's Hispanic Employee Organization and the Federally Employed Women. Those are both national organizations with local chapters at various federal agencies. We have a special interest group that's called Salutaris, the NIH Sexual and Gender Minority Employee Resource Group. That's gone through a lot of changes over the last 25, 30 years. Salutaris is a Latin word for health. And so that's why it was sort of a secret code, a secret code word at first. When the group was first founded back in 1992, 93, they actually met off campus during lunch in a mall in the food court, away from the office, because at that time it just wasn't safe to congregate in public at the office or to be out. Things have changed in such a way that they now have direct access to the NIH director and the institute directors to promote healthcare and workplace equity for people who are sexual and gender minority individuals. So again, it's been active at times, it's been inactive at times. It's gone through its own natural life cycles. There's a veterans special employee resource group, a returned Peace Corps volunteer group. And then there are the direct, I think more relevant to today's audience. We have Three Blind Mice, which was started about 10 years ago, and that's blind and vision impaired employees and allies. And again, I think Carrie mentioned this too, that a lot of the group membership is about being an ally. How can I be a better supervisor to employees who are blind or deaf or have a disability? How can I be a better coworker to somebody with a disability? Or I have a family member with a disability and want to network with others who have that shared experience. Abilities is the all-around general inclusive employees with disabilities group. Right now, we're going through a struggle over what to call ourselves. And if we're disabled, persons with disabilities, disabled persons, and there are some members or non-members who don't want to use the word disability at all, that they don't like the focus. And even for them, it's a negative, as opposed to having moved from handicapped or differently abled. They don't like the direct, blunt word of persons with disabilities or disabled persons. So we're kind of struggling with its membership and potential membership. There was a previous group that, again, went through a life cycle, and then staff moved on, and the group kind of phased out. And that's okay. There wasn't a need for it at the time. When there was a need, employees came back together and recreated or created a new group called Abilities. The Deaf Employees Advisory Forum, that was started around 1990, I think I mentioned, specifically around the need for more and better interpreting services. And so it was very much business driven, and it was also linguistic and culturally driven. It was deaf employees, it was not hard of hearing employees. And that's always been a bit of a issue for friction. And I think we all acknowledge that, members of the group, that it was driven by people who are capital D deaf, culturally deaf, who do use American Sign Language and prefer interpreters. It met a need. The group is still active, but it's mostly just email based. Even before COVID and telework or remote work, it was pretty much email only. And I would actually say that a lot of the reason for that is simply that the NIH has physically grown so much from one campus in Bethesda, Maryland, to so many disparate physical locations that we just can't get together for lunch anymore as we used to. It's simply a logistics issue. The most recent group is a neurodiversity group that was started just this past spring, and that's employees both who do research into neurodiversity and individual staff members, NIH employees who are neurodiverse, who either have autism or on the spectrum somewhere, or simply unidentified or unlabeled, but have some neurodiversity. Again, very employee driven. They meet after 5 o'clock. They meet around 5 to 6 in the evening at the end of the workday, Eastern Standard Time. And I'm sure there are members from across the country. It's based on WebEx or Teams. And a lot of those things are great that we're able to use these federal resources. there is a policy. Generally, employees are allowed to use about an hour or two per month of employee time, and your manager has to kind of support that. They have to support it, but they also have the authority to say, hey, you're spending too much time away from your job, and we are there being paid to do our job. And so this is in addition to it, and so we as employees and members, I think need to honor that we, and the agency wants us to have a good work life, and we need to balance that with getting our jobs done. In addition to the employee resource groups, we also have at the NIH what are called special interest groups, and those are very scientifically driven. So it may be individuals who are looking, regardless of their institute, very much looking at the science, and they get into the minutia of science. They meet monthly, bi-monthly, have lectures and webinars, seminar series. There are some that overlap with the employee resource groups. So there may be a healthcare diversity and healthcare disparities special interest group, or healthcare of Hispanics and Latin Americans special interest group. So it's looking at it from a scientific and a research angle rather than a cultural and social angle. So adding on to what Carrie's talked about in terms of the benefits, within the HLAA setting, what are you seeking? Is it deaf identity? Is it a cultural and social connection? Or is it more functional? Are you seeking to advocate and network with other employees who also struggle with or have found great success with better accessibility? Sharing tips on, captioning. My office may only want to use auto captioning. I'm pretty mixed on auto captioning tools within Teams or WebEx or Zoom. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So there are times where I really have to advocate for professional computer-assisted real-time transcription, CART service, because I know that if I'm going into a technical meeting or a scientific meeting, I need somebody listening to it and who's been given the materials ahead of time in order to spell those things correctly. If it's a one-on-one staff meeting, Teams and auto captioning works great for me. Business meetings, technical meetings, not so much. So I may need to advocate for myself. I may need some help in advocating. I may have had great success and can share that with other deaf and hard of hearing employees across the agency. And fortunately, that's also part of my job. So that helps kind of give some credibility when I'm helping other employees in another institute. Say, you know what, here's the research you need to provide to your manager to say that, okay, for one-on-one supervision meetings, I'll accept auto captioning. But in this training class, I need the technical terminology spelled correctly. This has to be professionally captioned. And it's not one or the other. You may want a deaf identified group, or you may want deaf and hard of hearing individuals to be a part of a larger disability group. They're both valid. It's just you need to think about what your desires are, what your needs are for the group. I can't encourage you more to network with other employee resource groups. So it may be the disability group networking with the women's group, or the aging group, or the persons of color, the African-American employees, the Latin American employees, because again, we fit into more than one category. I'm not a person of color, but my son and grandchildren are. So I may have issues or interests, not issues, interests that can be filled better by joining another group. Or it's just business, the chairs, the staff, the board of directors, I guess is what you'd call them, the chairpersons, the vice chair of the ERG, comparing notes. We have every few months at the NIH, the various ERGs have a meeting. And we have a listserv that goes out to all of the ERGs. We're doing a training in November on reasonable accommodations so that all of the ERGs, the employee resource groups, can better provide access, again, to whatever the group is, they provide access for people who are deaf or disabled. So in addition to networking across affinity within your company, network with similar ERGs in other companies. So if it's the deaf and disabled group within PNC, you might network with the deaf and disabled group in another corporate company, or from the NIH, we might network with Food and Drug Administration or Department of Labor. Find out if there's a national network already in place. There's Deaf in Government, which is federal government wide. I think there's also state and local government employees who are deaf or hard of hearing. And then there are chapters at different agencies. We're just now talking in the last couple of weeks about setting up a national network of disability employee resource groups, because we do have a lot at so many federal agencies. But it's helpful to build that national network, to share notes, to share documentation, your mission statement, your membership drives, your promotional materials. Why reinvent the wheel? And again, the more people involved or the more you can call on, the less work you have to do and redo. So Ask Earn, that's one great national resource. It's the and there's the Federal Exchange on Employment and Disability, and that's open to any federal employee whose job is accessibility or disability related. So it might be a Section 508 coordinator. Section 508 is a part of the Rehabilitation Act that requires that federal technology be accessible to people who are deaf or disabled. That's my specific function within the National Cancer Institute, is to advocate for, to coach, to mentor staff to ensure that software, hardware, websites, videos, any digital content that we create or buy is accessible to people who are deaf or disabled. So that's one great network to look into. And again, it may not be something you can join if you're in a private company, but it's certainly great material that you can borrow from. Deaf in Government, that's the, and here, yes, I've reaffirmed for myself, it's local, state, and federal agencies. They do monthly and bi-monthly webinars of great resources. Right now, there's one coming up on just on retirement. So some of them are deaf and hard of hearing directed presentations. Some of them are just presentations on any number of topics, but in American Sign Language. So by deaf professionals, for deaf professionals. Some resources, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to bother you with all the links. These are on the NIH Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion website. And it's just some blog articles on the benefits of employee resource groups. The fifth bullet, excuse me, is the policy. So if you're looking for a policy on for your employer, your company, or your federal agency, on how to support employees and establishing employee resource groups, it lays out both the rights and the responsibilities for employees. That's it. That's what I want to talk about today. Who do I turn it over to? So
I'll take it away. Thank you, both Carrie and Gary. A rhyme for the right reason in this case. So you both have been truly insightful, and don't leave yet, folks. We do have quite a few questions to address here, and so I appreciate everyone sticking on. So Carrie, if you want to turn on your screen, I'm going to address these questions to you both, if you'd like. The very first one here is a question about multiple disabilities. So is there a group for folks with cerebral palsy and hearing loss?
I'll try to answer it briefly. We have one of the things with our hidden disabilities group, where it's a bit of a sort of a catch-all that would reflect folks that may have multiple comorbidities, recognizing that there's people can have more than one type of disability. So that's how we seek to address that. And frankly, again, we find also that because of our various awareness groups, that people are members of multiple groups depending upon that particular disability. So in that instance, for example, the way we would address it, we don't have a cerebral palsy group, but we would probably advise that person, if we did, hey, you may want to join a member of that. You may want to become a member of the cerebral palsy group, as well as the hearing loss group. So we would kind of look to handle it that way.
I think
thank you.
I would definitely agree. That individuals with cerebral palsy may choose to join the disability group, but if they also have, or because of the cerebral palsy, have a hearing loss, they may be more active in the deaf and hard of hearing group. So you seek the allyship where you can find it. And that may be in more than one place.
That makes sense. And that's actually something that I do myself, just so I can learn about other disabilities as well. One theme question that we're getting multiple of here is around attending EBRGs. So a question that we have here is when does PNC or across the board, of course, when it comes to EBRGs meet? Is it on work time, lunchtime, after work? And another question that's along the lines of this is, how do we encourage managers to support attendance in employee resource groups and advocate for that?
Maybe I'll take another stab at that. Those are real world questions that I don't know that anybody, and I would say that PNC hasn't completely cracked the code on that. So to answer the questions as to much of the programming, we try to offer over the lunch hour, so that for somebody who might be a non-exempt employee, that the expectation was, hey, they would be able to do that on their lunch. The vast majority of all of our programming is done during the work day. And the way that we encourage managers to allow employees to participate is that message comes from the top. Our executive leadership, this is something that's critically important. They don't pay lip service to it. It is something that's critically important. One of the things that our diversity inclusion group does at the time that they send out letters for leaders of awareness groups that they can share with their managers, thanking them as a part. It's something that we would expect people to, as they're doing their self-evaluation, to reflect. So that's the way we attempt to encourage that. We're an organization of 60,000 people, and it's hard to get 60,000 people to do exactly anything. But I think we create a culture that people know what the expectation is, and that they just won't be successful long term if this is not something that's important to them.
Gary, anything to add?
No, I think we are there to do a job. That's what we're being paid for. I think some of us have the luxury, if the ERG is job related, that we can kind of double purpose our time and take advantage of it. But our job should come first. That's what we're being paid for. Mm-hmm. And the ERG participation should complement that. That management should support. I think that, and I've just posted our policy in the chat, having a policy in place that addresses both our responsibilities and our rights. Both the supervisors and the employees have rights and responsibilities. That kind of sets the tone that, yes, this is agency driven, it's agency supported. We want you to do it in balance with getting your job done. And that sometimes it does take doing it on your own time in the evenings. Or we need to provide flexibility around your schedule during the day.
Thank you for that, Gary. Another question here we have around EBRG budgets. So what should be considered when putting together a budget to start ERGs or employee resource groups at an organization, and what are costs, some of the costs involved?
Well, maybe I'll take that one, since Gary said that they don't have budgets. And Theo, hey, you can
Right.
chime in this as well as a part of a leader, and you're frankly probably even closer since you're a current leader. But I think part of that really boils down to what is the charter and focus of your resource group. And so for us, we would have budgets to host events. There's a big event that our awareness group is having here at the end of October, a summit. So there are costs associated with that. We have costs. So for example, there's a cost to a WebEx license, just using that as an example, right? So I mean, those sorts of costs that we have that have to be borne out. So if you have most of the costs are event related. much of the content that we deliver is digital, so you don't have situations like there's printing costs and things like that. We may get tchotchkes from time to time if we're looking to have a membership drive, so to speak, but those are the kinds of costs. And I don't know if something if you would add, Theo, to that in terms of cost or.
I wouldn't add anything more. I think you touched on everything.
Okay.
Of course, it depends on the charter, the mission, the vision of the EBRG and or ERG, and how big the group is too. So there's a lot of things to address. But the best thing to do is, when you're doing this is to ensure that you're starting out strong and understanding what is needed for the group. So. Another question here is it looks like looks like Amanda popped in.
Well, we are out of time, or a little bit over. We have some options. How many questions do we have left, Theo?
Looks like we have about 5 questions left.
I can always, if the panelists are willing, I can send them over, have you answer them, and we can post that with the recordings, if that's something you're willing to do.
Sure, Amanda, happy to do it.
Great. Well, what a great conversation. Thank you all. Thank you, Theo, from our employment task force, and thank you, Gary and Carrie. Also, thank you to Tammy, our captioner, for her wonderful captioning services today. And like I've said, this will be posted to the HLAA website at hearingless.org in the next week or two. And you can also check out hearingless.org for past webinar recordings as well, and for information on any future webinars. So thank you all for attending and joining us today. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Great job. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.